arrived at the portion of the unit that deals with westward expansion. And the image that you see on screen, painted by John Gast, who's a Prussian-born artist, spent most of his life in Brooklyn, is meant to illustrate the dual ideas of what's known as manifest destiny and quote-unquote progress. Now, Lady Columbia, viewed as the symbol of America at the time, has a school book in one hand, telegraph wire in the other. The western portion of the painting is viewed as more dark and mysterious, and whereas the light of the east is making its way to the west. Now we have covered wagons. You can see in the foreground and the background, natives in the west, hunters and trappers making their way over, stagecoaches. There's a number of different depictions of what's called manifest destiny here. All right, now manifest destiny doesn't exactly begin with President James K. Polk. He's one of the main players. Jefferson was the first president to conceive of what was called an Empire of Liberty. That would include Canada and Cuba. But during the 1840s, there was an article published in New York State's Democratic Review, and it was most likely written by John O'Sullivan, who was the fiery editor of that magazine. But he stated that it is our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence. Providence, religion. There's a belief that spreading westward was a task that had divine origins and divine intentions, and that America could fulfill the dreams of John Winthrop and become the beacon of light. Support of this concept came from multiple groups, including land speculators, railroad promoters, small farmers, northern working men, and large newspaper editors who are looking to capitalize on patriotism. Politically, Democrats were very supportive of the idea, while Whigs were a bit more cautious. Now, the term itself has become highly controversial because the policies and practices that are associated with this concept were done without the input or consideration of the Native Americans who were living on these lands. The term is also associated with slavery because those in favor of westward expansion, in many cases, wanted to extend slavery in the new territories. Now again, manifest destiny. President James K. Polk. Polk was what we would call a dark horse candidate for the presidency, and that meant that before the nomination convention he had very little chance, but yet he emerged victorious. Polk was nicknamed Young Hickory because he was a political protege of Andrew Jackson. He was called Old Hickory. He kept his ideas close to his chest. He had four main goals for his presidency, and he kept them a secret from everyone, except for his wife and a New England intellectual named George Bancroft. He had pledged to serve one term, and he had four things he wanted to accomplish in this term. Step one is settle the Oregon question with Great Britain. We'll see in a little bit that Oregon will indeed get resolved. He wants to acquire California to continue this westward push. He would like to reduce the tariff to revenue levels, very similar to Clay's Compromise following the Tariff of Abominations. And he wants to establish an independent treasury. Now, acquiring Texas was kind of part of the deal, but not in his official list of goals. And this is why the story of Manifest Destiny really goes hand in hand with Polk's lone term as president. Now, the two things we're going to take a look at are land acquisitions, deals that were made, treaties that were signed, where war could have broken out, but they didn't. The first of these is called the Aroostook War. Now, the boundary dispute between the United States and Canada went all the way back to the Treaty of Paris in 1783. The region between Maine and New Brunswick, of which the Aroostook River runs straight through, was really the most hotly contested area, and the respective militias of Maine and New Brunswick almost fought an armed engagement over the land. That's why Aroostook War is the name we give to this. Secretary of State Daniel Webster steps in to negotiate a solution with British diplomat Alexander Baring. And Baring's title was the first Baron Ashburton, hence the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. Now they don't want war, so they take a look at the maps. And there were maps discovered in London that would have provided Maine with the land they desired. But Webster really judged that compromise was the best long-term solution to the problem, proving we could work with England. Maine ended up gaining 7,000 square miles. New Brunswick got about 5,000. And Maine and Massachusetts were each paid 125,000 each by Great Britain. And this divider still stands today. Massachusetts was paid money in addition to Maine because prior to 1820, recall that Maine was part of Massachusetts. Now this treaty also established the northern boundary of what's now Minnesota, and over time it becomes critical because it contained the Mesabi and Vermilion iron ranges. Now in the grand scheme of things, this was all about President Tyler resolving his issues with the British before he focused on the real goal of Texas annexation. Tyler inherited the presidency after the death of William Henry Harrison. He wasn't elected, so it's going to be him that tries to reclaim it when James K. Polk will eventually run as a Democrat and win the election. So the Webster-Ashburton Treaty is treaty number 1. The second treaty is all about the Oregon question, that first goal of President Polk. Now, the decision on settling Oregon boundaries had been delayed first in 1818, then in 1827, and again after 1842. For decades, Britain and the United States had hotly contested ownership of the area. The Hudson's Bay Company had been founded in 1670, and they essentially controlled most of Canada. Fort Vancouver, the company headquarters, was located at the convergence of the Columbia and Willamette Rivers, and that's in modern-day Washington state. Protecting this Oregon Trail that went from Independence, Missouri to Oregon is considered critical because it took about 6 to 8 months to make the same journey around Cape Horn. By 1845, there were about 5,000 Americans living in Oregon, and that's compared to about 700 British. So the balance really tipped in favor of the Americans. The HBC, to their credit, no pun intended, did extend credit to the settlers of the region to buy goods, but the settlers never paid up. And this will cause them to move to Fort Victoria, which is the present-day site of Victoria, British Columbia. Now this concept of 54-40, or fight, that line is up here. It's the desire to get all of Oregon country, and was embraced by the Democratic platform in 1844. But this simply ignores reality. Both governments assumed that the land would be split between the two nations. President Polk wanted to follow President Tyler's example of a peaceful solution to the issue without alienating his base too much. American negotiations proposed a border at the 49th parallel, seen here, while keeping all of Vancouver Island in Canadian possession. The British agent outright rejected this. He took a look at this and said, absolutely not. This is not a solution we can agree upon. So Polk said, that's fine. However, he gave them an ultimatum. They would have 1 year to accept the offer, or else Americans would consider the joint occupation to be at an end. The British gave in, agreed to the border. The treaty was ratified very quickly because war had broken out with Mexico at the time. So that's kind of where American focus was. So when we take a look at this, we have 2 examples of using treaties to acquire more land without violence. President Polk is now 1 for 4. He gets Oregon, and he does it via diplomacy rather than conflict. So aspects of Manifest Destiny did play out using diplomatic solutions.